On a crisp autumn morning, the phone rang as I was setting up a contemporary art exhibition in Seoul. The trembling voice of Margaret, my childhood friend, made my blood run cold. "Belle, I hate to be the one to tell you this. Victoria sold. The house. Your house. There's nothing left." I dropped the glass sculpture I was holding. The shattering sound on the floor echoed what I felt inside, my world breaking into 1,000 pieces. The blue Victorian house on Cedar Lane, number 47, the only place I had ever called home, sold without my knowledge. "That can't be," I whispered, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "My father made it clear I would always have the right to stay there." "I was there yesterday," Margaret went on. "There's a huge dumpster in the driveway. Victoria's throwing out old things. I saw picture frames, books, even that old trunk from the attic. The trunk. My mother's trunk. Where we kept letters, photographs, the drawings I made for her in the final weeks before cancer took her. I'm coming back. Now." 12 hours later, I was on a flight to New York, abandoning the exhibition I had worked on for 6 months. My father's words from his will echoed in my mind. "Victoria shall have rights to the house, on the condition that Isabel may always stay there during her visits." A promise now broken. I clearly remember the look Victoria gave me at my father's funeral 8 months ago. There were no tears in her eyes, only a calculated gleam I mistook for shock. Now everything made sense. She had simply waited for the right moment, when I was too far away to stop her. The taxi crept slowly up Cedar Lane, and my heart sank at the sight of the massive green dumpster in front of the sky blue house. A piece of the white fence my father repainted every summer had already been torn down. Through the living room windows, I saw bare walls where generations of framed memories once hung. When the driver stopped, I couldn't move for a few seconds. "Ma'am, we're here," he repeated, glancing at me with sympathy in the rear view mirror. I paid the fare and stepped out with my single suitcase. The familiar Connecticut air, with its distinct scent of fallen leaves and fresh lake water nearby, brought no comfort. I felt like an intruder in the place that should have felt most like mine. That's when the front door opened. Victoria appeared, impeccably dressed as always, a beige sweater matching her linen pants. Beside her stood Olivia, my half-sister, holding an old shoebox. I recognized it instantly as the one that held the love letters exchanged by my parents. "Isabel." Victoria said my name like it was an unpleasant foreign word. "What an untimely surprise. I thought you were in Asia until next year." I walked toward the entrance, my legs moving on their own as I absorbed more details. The old oak tree in the backyard seemed to be the only untouched thing on the property. The swing my father built for me was gone. "Why, Victoria?" was all I could say, my voice steadier than I expected. "How could you?" She raised her perfectly shaped eyebrows, a thin smile forming on her coral-painted lips. "Because this house was never yours, Isabel, and frankly," her tone sharpened, her eyes locked onto mine, "you were never really part of the family." Those words hit me like a slap, and then, as if orchestrated by fate, a sleek black car pulled up behind my taxi. A tall man with graying hair stepped out, adjusting his navy blue suit, the new owner, I assumed, arriving to inspect his new purchase. Victoria smiled when she saw him, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, you arrived at the perfect time. Come meet my stepdaughter. She was just on her way out." The man turned toward me, and something in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition that made no sense, made my heart race for reasons I didn't yet understand. What none of us knew in that moment was that this meeting would change everything. What Victoria couldn't have imagined was that her final act of cruelty would end up being the beginning of her own downfall. The man approached with deliberately slow steps, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something in that gaze, a mix of compassion and understanding, that completely unsettled me. "Gabriel Hayes," he introduced himself, extending his hand. When I shook it, he held on a second longer than necessary. "You must be Isabel Winters." It wasn't a question. Victoria stepped between us with the fluidity of a snake slithering in for the strike. "Mr. Hayes is very busy today, Isabel. We have many details to go over regarding the renovations." "Renovations?" The word escaped like a horrified whisper. Oh, didn't Victoria mention it? Gabriel Hayes kept a neutral expression, but his voice held a tone I couldn't quite decipher. I have significant plans for this property. Olivia appeared in the doorway, holding another box. Mom, I found a few more. Oh. She stopped when she saw me. Unlike Victoria, there was something like guilt in her eyes before she quickly looked away. Where are my things? I asked, ignoring the newcomer and staring directly at Victoria. Where are my mother's photos? My father's books? The trunk from the attic? Victoria waved dismissively toward the garage. I set aside 3 boxes for you. The rest was donated or disposed of. You didn't show up to claim anything for 8 months, so I assumed you didn't care. 8 months? My father's barely cold in the ground. You knew I was working abroad. Life goes on, Isabel, Victoria replied, folding her arms. I couldn't keep this mausoleum intact just because you show up once or twice a year to relive the past. Harold is gone. The house was mine to decide what to do with. A hoarse, aged voice interrupted the tense moment. Miss Bell? Turning around, I saw Samuel Parker slowly approaching from the side garden. At 70 years old, he still stood tall, his hands knotted and weathered from decades of tending the garden my mother had loved so dearly. Samuel, I said, the first genuine wave of relief washing over me. A friendly face in this emotional minefield. Victoria rolled her eyes. What are you doing here, Parker? I already told you your services are no longer needed. Samuel completely ignored her, walking up to me. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Bell. Not just your father, but... He gestured subtly toward the house. Thank you, Samuel, I replied, feeling tears threatening to surface. Victoria sighed dramatically. If you're done with the sentimental reunions, Isabel, your things are in the garage. Mr. Hayes and I have business to discuss. Gabriel Hayes cleared his throat. Actually, Victoria, I'd like to make a slight change of plans. If Miss Winters could spare me a few minutes of her time. Victoria visibly tensed. What for? Isabel has no connection to this property anymore. On the contrary, Gabriel replied calmly. I believe she has a great deal to contribute to my understanding of this house's history. If I'm going to make changes, I need to understand what I'm altering. I walked to the garage, feeling strangely detached from my own body. The door was slightly ajar, revealing the space where my father used to spend hours restoring antique furniture, now empty except for 3 battered cardboard boxes in the corner. 3 boxes to sum up 47 years of existence. I knelt down and opened the first one. Sitting right on top, like a final slap in the face, was a framed photo from my 10th birthday. The glass was cracked, as if it had been tossed carelessly. In the picture, my father was hugging me as I blew out the candles. My mother had already been gone for 2 years. Victoria wasn't in the photo. She had refused to attend the celebration that day, claiming a migraine. I picked up the broken photo and pressed it to my chest, unable to look through the rest of the contents. The tears I had been holding back began to fall silently. Miss Bell. Samuel's voice came from the garage door. He glanced behind him nervously before whispering, Before you leave, check the oak tree. The old oak in the back. The oak tree? I repeated, confused. He just nodded meaningfully before stepping away as Victoria's voice called for Gabriel. I wiped my tears and forced myself to stand. This house held over 4 decades of my life. I wasn't going to leave without saying goodbye to my favorite spot on the property. I made my way around the house to the backyard, where the majestic old oak tree stood tall as ever. My swing was gone, but the rope marks were still visible on the thick lower branch. I leaned my forehead against the rough bark, feeling its solid warmth, the only thing that seemed unchanged. This is where your father asked me to make a promise. Gabriel? Hayes's voice behind me made me turn sharply. He was a few feet away, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. A promise to do what? I asked, instinctively defensive. That if anything ever happened to him, I would make sure. You never lost your connection to this place. He stepped forward. Isabel, your father knew Victoria planned to sell the house. That's why he came to me almost a year ago. My legs felt weak. You knew my father? Gabriel Hayes smiled for the first time, a gentle smile that completely softened his otherwise stern face. I knew your parents before you were even born. In fact, he hesitated, looking at the oak tree with something like reverence. It was under this very tree that your father proposed to Caroline. After she broke up with me. I froze, trying to process his words. You and my mom? We were engaged in college, Gabriel confirmed, his eyes lost in some distant memory. Then she met Harold at an architecture exhibit. The moment I saw them together, I knew I had lost. He smiled with a gentle melancholy. But I gained two extraordinary friends. My dad never mentioned you, I said, still trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle of my family history. Gabriel nodded. We grew apart after I moved abroad. I came back to the US 5 years ago. Your father reached out to me shortly after the diagnosis. Diagnosis? The word hit my stomach like a stone. What diagnosis? Gabriel's face showed surprise, then sorrow. I thought you knew. Your father found out he had a brain aneurysm. The doctor said it could rupture at any moment. I had to lean against the oak tree, feeling the world spin. He told me it was a sudden heart attack. In the few video calls we had, he seemed fine. My voice trailed off as I realized the merciful lie my father had told to protect me. Harold didn't want you to worry. He didn't want you to give up your career to take care of him, Gabriel said gently. But he also knew that Victoria had changed. Over the years, their marriage became something different from what it once was. A shadow passed through the garden. Victoria was watching us from the kitchen window. Gabriel noticed my glance and lowered his voice. Your father suspected Victoria would sell the house as soon as she could. That's why he asked me to buy it when the time came. You bought this house for me? The implications started to form in my mind. Gabriel smiled. Technically, I bought it with the money your father left in a secret fund. He knew Victoria would find any account or property in his name, so we created a workaround. At that moment, Victoria opened the back door and stormed across the lawn like a human-shaped thunderstorm. What's going on here, Mr. Hayes? I thought we were discussing the renovations. And we are, Gabriel replied calmly. I'm gathering valuable information about the property. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Isabel has nothing to do with this house's future. In fact, she should be leaving. Her things have already been packed. 3 boxes, I said, finding renewed strength somewhere inside me. 47 years reduced to 3 cardboard boxes. Consider yourself lucky, Victoria snapped. I almost threw everything away. You barely showed up here, always. Too busy with your exhibitions and travels. Gabriel stepped in gently. Victoria, I believe there's a detail about this transaction I need to clarify. There's nothing to clarify, she interrupted. The sale is finalized, the papers are signed. This house legally belonged to me, and now it belongs to you. Actually, a new voice joined the conversation. Samuel Parker had returned, holding something in his hands. That's not entirely accurate. Victoria turned, annoyed. What are you talking about, old man? And what is that? She pointed to the object Samuel was holding. It was a waterproof metal box, about the size of a large book. Samuel held it out to me. Your father asked me to keep this hidden in the hollow oak in case something happened. He told me I'd know when the time was right. I picked up the box with trembling hands. A simple lock kept it sealed. This is ridiculous, Victoria scoffed. Whatever this little performance is, it won't change anything. The house was sold, legally. Gabriel watched in silence as I examined the box. At the bottom, there was a small inscription. For Belle, when the oak still stands. That's when it hit me, that phrase Gabriel had mentioned earlier, about my father asking him to promise something under the oak tree. The oak still stands, I murmured. Victoria lunged forward, trying to take the box from my hands. It's probably just sentimental junk. Let it go, Isabel. I stepped back, shielding the box. It's addressed to me, Victoria. You've taken enough already. You'll need a key, Samuel said quietly. Small, made of brass. Your father always kept it on his keychain. A flash of memory, the day of my father's funeral, Victoria handing me his personal belongings. Among them, an old keychain with a single small key that didn't seem to open anything I recognized. At the time, I thought it belonged to a drawer. In his office. I have the key, I said, a wave of purpose rising within me. It's at my apartment in New York. How convenient, Victoria sneered. A mysterious key for a mysterious box that conveniently shows up when you need some drama. Gabriel, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Victoria, I believe we should continue this conversation after Isabel has a chance to retrieve the key and open the box. In the meantime, all renovations are temporarily suspended. What? Victoria exploded. You can't do that! The sale is finalized! I can and I will, Gabriel replied with unexpected firmness. As the new owner, I have the right to decide when and how to proceed with any changes to the property. Victoria seemed momentarily speechless. I took the opportunity to hold the box tightly against my chest and turned to Gabriel. I need to go to New York to get the key. I can be back tomorrow. He nodded. I'll be here. And Victoria, he turned to her, I suggest you don't remove anything else from the house until this matter is resolved. Olivia, who had been quietly watching from the back porch, finally stepped down and walked over. In her hands, she held something that made my heart ache, the old teddy bear that once belonged to my mother. I found this in the attic, she said softly, extending it toward me. Mom said it was junk, but... She hesitated, glancing nervously at Victoria. I remembered how much it meant to you. I took the faded bear, feeling tears well up again. It was the only item my mother had kept from her own childhood. Victoria looked furious at Olivia's gesture. Inside. Now, she ordered her daughter. Enough of this nonsense. As they walked away, Gabriel stepped closer. Tomorrow, then? I nodded, feeling a strange mix of confusion, hope, and apprehension. Holding the metal box and the teddy bear, I took one last look at the oak tree that had witnessed so many moments of my life. The oak still stands, I whispered to myself, like a mantra, like a promise. Samuel gently touched my shoulder. Your father was a man who saw far ahead, Miss Bell. He knew this day would come. As I walked away from the property, feeling the weight of the metal box in my hands, a certainty began to grow within me. Whatever was inside that box would change everything, not just for me, but especially for Victoria, who seemed so sure of her victory. The taxi waiting at the entrance no longer felt like an escape vehicle, but rather a path to an inevitable return. My apartment in New York felt strange after months away, a clean, minimalist space, completely impersonal. It was where I slept between trips, never a home. Unlike the blue house on Cedar Lane, this place held no stories within its walls. After rummaging through a memory box in my bedroom closet, I found my father's keychain. The small brass key gleamed under the light, as if it had been patiently waiting for this moment. I held it in the palm of my hand, feeling its insignificant weight carrying enormous promises. I didn't waste any time. I caught the first train, back to Connecticut the next morning. The metal box remained closed all night, not for lack of trying. I tried every tool I could find in the apartment, but the lock stubbornly refused to budge. My father had made sure that only the right key could reveal its secrets. When I arrived at Cedar Lane, I immediately noticed that the trash container was gone. Gabriel was waiting on the front porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, as if he had always belonged there. Good morning, Isabel, he greeted me with a genuine smile. Did you find the key? I nodded, holding it up. Where's Victoria? She left early, said something about meeting with her lawyer. His tone was casual, but his eyes were alert. I don't think we have much time. We headed to the back of the house, beneath the shelter of the old oak tree. It was a perfect day, clear blue skies, not a cloud in sight, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves above us. The kind of day my mother would have called a gift from the universe. We sat on a rusty garden bench that had somehow survived Victoria's cleanouts. I placed the metal box between us, inserted the small key into the lock, and turned it. The soft click of the lock was almost anticlimactic given the weight of the moment. Inside the box, I found several neatly organized envelopes, old photographs I thought were lost forever, and at the very top, a handwritten letter on my father's law office stationery. I recognized his elegant handwriting instantly. My dearest Belle, if you are reading this letter, then my suspicions were correct, and the worst has happened. Forgive me for not being completely honest about my health. The doctors gave me only a few months, and I didn't want your bright life to be dimmed by watching me fade. More importantly, forgive me for not properly protecting your legacy. The house on Cedar Lane was never truly mine to give. It always belonged to you. When your mother passed away, her will was clear. The house, which had been in her family for 3 generations, was to go to you when you came of age. For reasons that seemed logical at the time, I never fully formalized that transfer. Victoria and I were newly married, you were young, and I naively believed we could build a unified family in that memory-filled space. For years, I held on to the illusion that the house was mine to leave in my will, a fiction Victoria accepted without question. Only when I received my diagnosis did I realize my mistake. Victoria had changed over the years, becoming bitter about your success and my ongoing devotion to the memory of Caroline. I tried to make things right, but time was not on my side. That's when I turned to Gabriel, a man who, despite his past with your mother, has always shown unwavering integrity. I asked him to buy the house when Victoria inevitably put it up for sale, using a fund I had kept hidden all these years. Inside this envelope, you will find your mother's original will, property documents proving the true lineage of the house, and instructions for Attorney Thompson on how to proceed. There is also a bank account in your name that Gabriel helped establish. The house is yours, Belle. It always was. With all my love, your father. My vision blurred with tears as I handed the letter to Gabriel. I began examining the other documents. My mother's will, clearly designating the house to me. Property records dating back to 1920, when my great-grandfather built the house. And legal papers that Gabriel and my father had prepared. Your father was determined to make things right, Gabriel said softly after reading the letter. In the final weeks, he worked on this every time Victoria was out of the house. Why did she do this? I asked, the pain in my voice obvious even to myself. Why hate me so much? Gabriel sighed, choosing his words carefully. I don't think it's hatred exactly. Victoria always felt like an outsider in that house. Caroline's memory lingered in every room, and Harold never could, or never wanted to, erase it completely. So, she decided to erase them on her own, I concluded, feeling a new understanding begin to form. By selling the house, she could finally rid herself of my mother's ghost. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our conversation. I quickly placed the documents back in the box. Victoria and a man in a gray suit, undoubtedly her lawyer, were walking toward us. Her expression shifted between triumph and annoyance. Mr. Hayes, she called out, completely ignoring me. This is Mr. Winters, my attorney. He'd like to discuss a few points regarding the sale of the property that seemed to have caused some confusion. The lawyer stepped forward, extending his hand to Gabriel. Thomas Winters, no relation to the family, he quickly clarified. I understand there's some dispute regarding the legitimacy of the sale. Gabriel stood, calm as always. Not exactly a dispute, Mr. Winters. More a matter of clarifying the facts. Victoria smiled triumphantly. I have the documents proving the house was in Harold's name, and that he left it to me in his will. Any other claim is simply false. I stood up as well, holding the metal box tightly. Before we proceed with any definitive statements, Mr. Winters, I believe you should take a look at these documents. Unlike Victoria, the lawyer seemed genuinely interested in uncovering the truth. He accepted the papers I handed him and began to examine them carefully. Victoria tried to peer, over his shoulder. What is this? More made-up stories? They're my mother's original will, property records dating back to 1920, and legal documents prepared by my father before his death, I explained, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. Mr. Way, Winters adjusted his glasses, his expression gradually shifting as he read. "This is extraordinary," he finally murmured. "If these documents are authentic, and they appear to be, the house was never legally Harold Winters to bequeath. He was essentially a caretaker of the property until Isabel came of age." Victoria snatched the papers from his hands. "This is ridiculous! Obvious forgeries!" But as she examined the documents, her face grew pale. "You recognize the signature, don't you?" I asked softly. "My father's at the bottom of the page, authenticating my mother's will." She looked at me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time in decades. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" Her voice had a tremble of vulnerability I'd never heard before. "Because he believed we could all live together in that house," I answered. "He wanted a whole family, not a divided one." Gabriel spoke up, turning to the lawyer. "Mr. Winters, as you can see, the sale of the property was technically invalid, since Victoria didn't hold the legal title to sell it." The lawyer nodded slowly. "This certainly raises serious legal questions. Victoria, we need to speak in private." As they stepped aside for a tense conversation by the front door, Gabriel gently touched my shoulder. "There's one more thing." "You should see," he said, guiding me back to the oak tree. He pointed to a small bronze plaque almost hidden among the tree's exposed roots. I crouched down to read the engraved words, partially covered by years of natural growth. Caroline. And Harold, 1974, forever. "They buried a time capsule here on their wedding day," Gabriel explained. "Your father told me about it. Love letters, dreams for the future, and a miniature portrait Caroline painted of the house. He said that no matter what happened, to the physical structure, the essence of the house, the love that built it, would always be protected here, in the roots." I ran my fingers over the plaque, feeling a deep connection to my parents that I hadn't felt in years. "The house has come back to you, Belle," Gabriel said softly. "The question now is, what do you plan to do with it?" The legal resolution came surprisingly quickly in the 2 weeks that followed. Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Winters, showed unexpected integrity. After verifying the authenticity of the documents, he himself recommended an out-of-court settlement to avoid a lengthy trial Victoria would certainly lose. Gabriel, still technically the legal owner of the house due to the fraudulent sale, began the process of transferring ownership to my name. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that had always rightfully been mine was finally returning to me through a man my mother had loved decades ago. On a Tuesday morning, I found Victoria sitting alone on the front porch, watching the workers remove signs of the rushed renovation attempt. Her face looked as though it had aged years in just a few days, the lines around her eyes deeper, her posture less proud. "May I sit?" I asked, gesturing to the space beside her on the porch swing. She nodded silently, her eyes never leaving the view ahead. We sat like that for several minutes, the soft creak of the swing the only sound between us. "It was never personal, you know," she finally said, her voice surprisingly free of bitterness. "At first, anyway." "What do you mean?" "My resentment. It wasn't really about you." Victoria let out a long sigh. "It was about feeling like a replacement, a lesser version." She finally turned to face me. "Every time Harold looked at you, he saw Caroline, and every time he looked at me, well, he just saw someone who wasn't her." I felt an unexpected wave of empathy. "He loved you, Victoria, in his own way." "In his own way, she repeated with a sad smile. "Yes, I suppose he did, but never like he loved your mother. Never completely, without hesitation." She gestured toward the house. "This place was always a shrine to her memory. I was just a caretaker, never the owner. And that's why you wanted to get rid of it when you had the chance," I said quietly. Victoria nodded. "It felt like the only way to finally set myself free, to move on." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "The irony is, in trying to free myself, I ended up losing everything." "Not everything," I gently corrected. "You still have Olivia." At the mention of her daughter, Victoria's face softened. "She's furious with me," said she. Always knew the house meant a lot to you, but never imagined I'd sell it without even giving you the chance to." She trailed off. At that moment, Olivia emerged from the house carrying 2 boxes. When she saw us talking, she paused briefly before continuing toward the car parked in the driveway. "Are you moving out today?" I asked. Victoria nodded. "We found an apartment in the city. Small, but a new start, I suppose." The conversation was interrupted when Gabriel approached, holding a few documents. "The papers are ready for signing," he announced, pausing as he noticed the atmosphere between us. Victoria stood, smoothing her dress with a nervous gesture I had never associated with her usual composure. Best to get it over with, then. As she walked off to sign the final documents that would make her departure official, I stayed on the porch, absorbing the complexity of emotions this place stirred in me. Anger, sadness, nostalgia, and now, surprisingly, a touch of understanding for the woman who had been my adversary for so long. Samuel appeared around the side of the house, carrying a watering can. Though technically no longer the gardener, he still tended the rose bushes as if nothing had changed. "Your mother's flowers are coming back," he said as he approached the porch. "Stubborn roses, those. Victoria tried to rip them out last." "Year, but they always find a way to return," I smiled, seeing in that the perfect metaphor. Just like me, Samuel. After Victoria and Olivia left, a silent goodbye, full of unspoken words and incomplete reconciliations, I walked through the empty house, each room echoing with memories. Gabriel found me in the library, where empty shelves waited for the return of the books my father had collected over decades. "So," he said, leaning against the doorway, "what do you plan to do now?" I looked out the window toward the garden, at the oak tree that had stood firm through generations, at the resilient rose bushes that refused to disappear. "I'm staying," I replied with a certainty that surprised even me. "Not just for visits. I'm actually going to live here." Gabriel raised his eyebrows. "What about your job? The international exhibitions?" "I'll find a balance. The art gallery in Hartford is looking for a curator." I ran my hand over the polished wood of the desk my father used to work at. "This place was never just a house to me, Gabriel. It was the only place in my life where there was real continuity, where memories weren't just stored, they were lived." Knowing smile appeared on his face. "Your father would be happy to hear that." "There's one more thing," I continued hesitantly. "This house is too big for one person, and there's too much history?" he suggested. "Actually, I was going to say there's too much room for new stories." I took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'm thinking about turning part of it into a small art center for neighborhood youth, a place where they can learn, create." I gestured. "Around us. Give this place a new purpose beyond just being a repository of memories." Gabriel stepped further into the room, his eyes lighting up with approval. "Harold always said you had Caroline's creative vision combined with his own determination. Do you think it's a good idea?" "I think it's perfect." He walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "The past is important, Belle, but it's just the foundation. What we build on top of it, that's what truly matters." 3 months went by quickly. The Youth Art Center in the east wing of the house was nearly finished, with makeshift studios where rarely used guest rooms once stood. The library was filling up again, not only with my father's recovered books, but also with new volumes that reflected my own interests. Gabriel had become a regular presence, helping with the renovation and sharing stories about my parents I had never heard before. It was strange and comforting at the same time to get to know sides of my parents through someone who had loved them in different ways. On one particularly pleasant fall afternoon, while we were organizing the small studio that had once been my mother's room, I came across a box I didn't recognize. Inside was a set of old paintbrushes, carefully preserved, and a sketchbook. "These were hers," Gabriel said, looking over my shoulder. "She always said one day she'd teach you how to paint." I flipped through the sketchbook, amazed by the talent my mother had that I'd never fully known. In the final third of the notebook, the pages were blank, waiting for something that never came. "Maybe I should learn," I murmured, more to myself, then to Gabriel. He smiled, that gentle smile that had become familiar and comforting. I think she'd like that. The sound of a doorbell interrupted the moment. Gabriel offered to get it, leaving me alone with my mother's newly discovered relics. A few minutes later, I heard his voice calling me from the living room, an unusual tone of surprise coloring his words. I walked downstairs to find Olivia, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room, holding an ornate box. "Olivia?" I exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "I didn't expect to see you." She looked nervous, avoiding direct eye contact. "I found this among my mother's things while we were going through the apartment. I thought, you should have it." I accepted the box with curiosity. When I opened it, I found childhood photographs I thought had been lost forever. Me and my dad building a treehouse, birthday parties, even a few rare pictures of my mom. "Victoria, kept all this the whole time?" I asked, incredulous. Olivia nodded, finally meeting my eyes. She never threw it away, even when she said she did. She kept everything in a locked box in the attic of our old apartment. She hesitated. "I think a part of her always knew you'd come back one day to reclaim your place." I examined one particular photograph, my first day of school, my dad kneeling beside me, adjusting my backpack. Victoria was visible in the background, watching, an unreadable expression on her face. "How is she?" I asked softly. "Adjusting. It's hard for her." Olivia looked around, noting the changes I had made to the house. She'll never admit it, but she regrets how everything happened. I nodded, understanding more than I expected. "Tell her she's welcome to visit, when she's ready." Olivia looked surprised. "You really want that? After everything?" I thought. For a moment, glancing at Gabriel, who was watching our exchange with quiet attentiveness. "This house was always about family, Olivia. A complicated, imperfect, sometimes broken family. But still, family." I held the box of photographs against my chest. Maybe it's time we all learn how to build something new from the pieces. After Olivia left, with a hesitant promise to return for the art center's grand opening, Gabriel and I walked to the oak tree in the backyard. The day was coming to an end, the setting sun casting long shadows across the freshly mowed lawn. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching the golden leaves fall gently around us. "When Victoria said I was never really part of the family, it felt like a stab to the heart. But now I realize she was partially right." Gabriel looked at me, curious. "I was never just part of the family. I am its heart, just like my mother was." "This house? These memories?" I gestured around us. "This legacy. I'm its guardian now." Gabriel smiled, understanding. "And a guardian who's building something new, not just preserving the old." I nodded, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. The sun was setting over the blue Victorian house on Cedar Lane. No longer a house of ghosts and resentment, but a home being reborn with new purpose and possibilities. My stepmother sold my childhood home thinking she was erasing my past. I reflected aloud. But instead, she gave me the chance to rediscover my future. Gabriel reached out gently, his fingers intertwining with mine. Some legacies can't be sold or stolen. They live within us, waiting to be rediscovered at the right time. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, we remained beneath the oak tree that had witnessed generations of love, loss, and renewal. A tree that, like the blue house and like myself, still stood tall despite all the storms it had weathered. 6. Months later, the blue Victorian house on Cedar Lane had been transformed. The Caroline Winters Youth Art Center now filled the entire east wing, with wide windows that let natural light flood the spaces where young artists discovered their creative voices. The upstairs rooms, once quiet repositories of memories, now echoed with laughter and the sound of brushes against canvas. The official opening was set for that sunny spring day. Colorful banners decorated the entrance, and tables with food and drinks dotted the meticulously restored garden, thanks to Samuel, who, despite insisting he was too old to work full-time, still showed up almost daily to care for the roses, now blooming in all their glory. As I adjusted the last decorations in the main hall, I heard the sound of tires on the driveway. Gabriel had left earlier to pick up the last supplies, but when I looked out the window, I saw a car I didn't recognize. A silver Mercedes parked carefully, and my heart skipped a beat when Victoria stepped out from the driver's seat. She looked different, somehow lighter, dressed in softer colors than her usual dark, austere tones. I watched her hesitate at the entrance, clearly debating whether or not to go through with it. I opened the front door before she could ring the bell. "Victoria," I greeted her, keeping my voice neutral. "What a surprise!" She looked nervous, something I'd never associate with the confident woman I'd known for decades. "Olivia mentioned the opening was today," she said, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, surprising us both with the sincerity in my voice. "Please come in." Victoria stepped over the threshold slowly, her eyes taking in all the changes. Where there had once been formal furniture and sober decor, now vibrant colors and cozy arrangements gave the house a sense of vitality. On the walls, student art displays mixed with restored family photographs and a few paintings I had discovered were made by my mother. "It's different," she said, and I noticed there was no judgment in her voice, just observation. "But it's still the same house," I replied, "just with a new purpose." Victoria nodded slowly, stopping in front of one particular photograph. The same one Olivia had brought months earlier, from my first day of school with my dad. "I always envied the relationship you had with Harold," she suddenly admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The way he looked at you, with so much pride." She gently touched the frame. I tried so hard to get him to look at Olivia that same way. The unexpected confession caught me off guard. For years, I'd seen Victoria as a one-dimensional antagonist in my life, never really considering the depth of her motivations or pain. "My father loved Olivia," I offered gently. "Just differently." Victoria turned to me, her eyes glistening with what looked like unshed tears. "I brought something for you, for the center." She handed me the package she was holding. I found it in the attic of our old apartment, after Olivia took the photographs. I carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a framed painting, an exquisite watercolor of the blue Victorian house in its prime, with lush gardens and the majestic oak tree in the foreground. In the bottom corner, a delicate signature. "Caroline." My mother painted this," I murmured, haunted by the beauty of the piece and the unexpected gesture. Victoria nodded. "Harold kept it in his office for years. When we got married, he took it down. I thought it had been thrown out. I found it tucked away in a box of old books. He must have kept it, unable to display it, but just as unable to let it go." I touched the painting reverently, feeling a tangible connection to the mother I barely knew. "Thank you. I have no words." "Well, that'll be a first," Victoria said with a flicker of her old sharpness. But there was a reluctant smile on her lips that softened the words. The sound of more cars arriving interrupted our unexpected moment of connection. Victoria stepped back slightly. "I should go. I don't want to interfere with your big day." "Stay," the words came out before I could second-guess them. "You're part of this house's story just as much as I am, in different ways, but still a part of it." She looked genuinely surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure? I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable." "Life's too short for eternal grudges, Victoria." I gestured to the painting in my hands. "And sometimes, the most unexpected treasures come from the people we least expect." The celebration was a greater success than I had imagined. Dozens of people from the community showed up, families of the young artists, representatives from the Hartford Art Gallery where I now worked 3 days a week, curious neighbors who had watched the transformation of the house from afar. Gabriel stayed by my side for most of the event, his presence a silent pillar of support as I navigated my roles as hostess, director of the center, and renewed guardian of the house. Olivia arrived later, clearly surprised to find her mother chatting amiably with Samuel near the rose bushes. When our eyes met, I offered a small smile, which she returned hesitantly. By late afternoon, as most of the guests began to leave, I found a moment to slip away to the back of the property. The oak tree, as always, stood tall and steady, its new leaves forming a welcoming green canopy. I sat on the new swing Gabriel had installed weeks earlier, gently swaying as I watched the sun begin its descent on the horizon. My mother's painting rested in my lap. I planned to hang it in the front hall where everyone who entered could immediately see her vision of this house. There you are. Gabriel's voice pulled me out of my reverie. He approached carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Escaping your own party? I smiled, accepting the glass he offered. Just taking it all in. He nodded, understanding without the need for more words. It was one of the qualities I appreciated most about him, his ability to understand silences as deeply as words. Victoria and Olivia just left, he said, sitting beside me on the swing, which was wide enough for 2. Victoria mentioned something about possibly helping with an art history workshop for the older students. Apparently, she studied art history before she met your father. I didn't know that, I said, once again surprised at how many sides of Victoria had remained unknown to me all these years. I think there's a lot we didn't know about her, Gabriel reflected. Just as there was a lot she didn't know about you. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the swing moving gently, the sound of the oak leaves whispering above us. You know what's funny? I said at last. When my friend Margaret called to say Victoria had sold the house, I thought I'd lost everything. That she had finally succeeded in erasing my past, in disconnecting me from my roots. I looked around, the revitalized garden, the house now buzzing with new purpose. But in the end, she inadvertently gave me a gift. Gabriel raised his eyebrows curiously. She forced me to fight for what really mattered, to rediscover not just my past, but to build a future here. I touched the painting gently, to turn memories into something living, not just preserved. Gabriel raised his glass in a silent toast. To new life in old roots. We toasted, and as our glasses clinked, I felt something click into place. Not just between the 2 of us, whose relationship had slowly blossomed during these months of rebuilding, but within myself. A sense of belonging that went far beyond simply owning walls and a roof. My stepmother sold my childhood home, saying I was never truly part of the family. I reflected, gazing at the blue Victorian structure, now glowing with renewed life against the twilight sky. But what she didn't realize is that family isn't just about who accepts us, it's also about who we choose to be and the legacy we choose to create. Gabriel laced his fingers through mine, his touch a quiet anchor in this moment of clarity. And what legacy are you building now, Belle? He asked gently. I looked at the house, at the arts center already transforming young lives, at the garden where my mother's roses were blooming once again, at the oak tree that had witnessed generations of love, loss, and renewal. A legacy of second chances. I finally replied, for this house, for the young artists, for Victoria and Olivia, and for myself. As the sun finally set, casting its last golden light over the blue Victorian house, I felt the circle complete itself. What had begun as a story of betrayal and loss had transformed into something far more complex and rich, a tapestry of redemption, understanding, and renewal. The house I once lost had returned to me, not just as a structure of walls and memories, but as a living space where new stories could be written, where the past and the future could coexist in harmony, and where I had finally found not just my place, but my purpose. The new owner had truly surprised me, not just Gabriel with his unexpected intervention, but myself, the true owner not only of the physical structure, but of the spiritual legacy it represented. And as the first stars began to sprinkle the night, I knew for certain this was not an ending, but a new beginning, for the house, for the lives it touched, and for me. It was, after all, the most unexpected ending to a story that had started with 5 cutting words. You were never family. Because now I understood the deeper truth. I wasn't just part of the family, I was its guardian, its storyteller, and more importantly, its continuation. And that, perhaps, was the greatest surprise of all. Spring had returned to Cedar Lane, bringing with it a burst of color to the garden of the blue Victorian house. Caroline's roses were especially vibrant that year, as if they too wanted to join the celebration that was approaching, the first anniversary of the Youth Arts Center. The phone rang while I was arranging the anniversary exhibit in the old dining room, now transformed into a spacious gallery where the young artist's work would be displayed. "Belle Winters speaking," I answered, balancing the phone while adjusting a frame. "Miss Winters, this is Dr. Eleanor Phillips from the Hartwick Foundation for the Arts." I stopped what I was doing, immediately recognizing the name of the prestigious institution that funded educational art projects across the country. 3. Months earlier, Gabriel had encouraged me to submit a proposal to expand the center, something I had done with little expectation. "I'm pleased to inform you that your proposal for the Art in Historic Homes program has been approved by our board. The Hartwick Foundation would like to offer a $250,000 grant for the expansion of the Caroline Winters Youth Arts Center." When I hung up, my hands were trembling. The funding would not only allow for the complete renovation of my father's old studio for sculpture classes, but also the creation of scholarships for talented young artists from low-income families. Gabriel found me still frozen in the same spot, holding the phone with a stunned expression. "Belle? Did something happen?" When I told him about the call, his face lit up with the smile that had become such an essential part of my daily life. "I knew they'd see the value in what you've created here," he said, wrapping his arms around me. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our celebration. Through the window, I saw Victoria stepping out of her car, carrying several folders. In recent months, to everyone's surprise, she had become a regular presence at the house, leading a weekly course on Renaissance art history that had become unexpectedly popular among the older students. Our relationship had evolved into a kind of respectful peace. We would never be close friends, but we had found common ground in our shared love of art and, in different ways, the memory of Harold. "I brought the materials for tomorrow's class," Victoria announced as she walked in. Her sharp eyes quickly picked up on our expressions. "What happened?" As we shared the news, I noticed how much Victoria had changed. The bitterness that once defined her features had softened, replaced by something closer to acceptance. The apartment in the city, which she had initially seen as a humiliating defeat, had become a space of her own, where she was finally building an identity separate from the shadow of my father and the house she had never truly felt was hers. "Congratulations," she said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised me. Harold would have been proud. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, Gabriel and I walked to the oak tree, our unofficial ritual for meaningful moments. We sat on the swing, now as naturally placed beneath the strong branches as the original one my father had built decades ago. $250,000, I murmured, still processing. It's almost ironic, isn't it? Victoria sold the house for just a little more than that, thinking she was taking something precious from me. Gabriel thought about it for a moment. Maybe it's not irony, but poetic justice. The universe has interesting ways of restoring balance. I leaned against his shoulder, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. "You know what surprises me the most?" I confessed. "It's not the money or the recognition. It's how something that began with so much pain and resentment could turn into something so healing for all of us." Gabriel nodded, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. "The best stories rarely follow a straight path, Belle. The most meaningful ones are the ones that surprise us with unexpected turns." I looked at the house I had nearly lost, now not just recovered, but reborn with a renewed purpose. Lights were beginning to turn on in various rooms, casting that warm glow that always made me feel the house was alive, breathing along with us. Over the past few days, in preparation for the anniversary celebration, we had set up a small exhibit in the front hall, photographs documenting the house's transformation. The first image showed a dumpster in the driveway and the empty walls I found on that fateful day. The last one captured a group of young artists laughing on the porch steps, their colorful works framing the front door. Between those two photos, the entire journey, the discovery of the metal box under the oak, the revelation of Gabriel as the secret buyer, the legal transfer of the property, the center's grand opening, and even a surprising moment. Victoria and me side by side during a class, both gesturing toward a reproduction of Botticelli. At the center of this visual timeline, I had placed my mother's painting, the blue Victorian house as she had seen, it as she had loved it. Beneath it, a simple caption. Some houses are more than structures, their promises kept through time. Gabriel pulled a small box from his pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I have something for you to celebrate. I opened the box to find a delicate silver pendant, a perfect miniature of the blue Victorian house, complete with tiny window details and even the oak tree beside it. So you can always carry your home with you, no matter where you are, he explained. As he fastened the chain around my neck, I felt the light weight of the pendant against my skin, a tangible reminder that home isn't just a place, but a journey. A year ago, I thought I had lost everything when I got that call. From Margaret, I reflected. I never imagined that moment of despair would be the first step toward reclaiming not just the house, but something much more valuable. And what would that be? Gabriel asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. Sense of purpose. Of continuity. I gently touched the pendant. The understanding that sometimes we need to lose something to truly grasp its value and potential. As we stood up to return to the house, our house now, in every way that mattered, I glanced one last time at the starry sky beginning to emerge above the oak tree. Somewhere I believed my parents were watching with approval as a new life bloomed from the seeds they had planted so many years ago. My stepmother sold my childhood home thinking she was taking everything from me, I said quietly to the stars. Instead, she forced me to realize that the true legacy was never in the walls or the land, but in what we choose to build together. And as we walked hand in hand toward the warm lights of the blue Victorian house, I understood that the greatest surprise of all had been discovering that sometimes what feels like a devastating ending is simply the necessary prologue to a far more meaningful beginning. After all, the best stories rarely end where we expect. They simply turn the page to a new chapter full of unexpected possibilities. Sitting in my upstairs office in the blue Victorian house, I watched the snow falling gently over the sleeping garden. The oak tree, as always, stands firm, its bare branches traced against the gray winter sky like a black and white masterpiece. The key, Caroline Winter's Art Center, has flourished beyond my most hopeful expectations. With funding from the Hartwick Foundation, we expanded into an annex built where an old greenhouse once stood. The program now supports over 100 young artists annually, with full scholarships for 30 of them. I open the top drawer of the desk, once my father's, now mine, and pull out the newspaper I keep as a keepsake. The headline still makes me smile. Old family home transformed into award-winning art center, how a property dispute led to a cultural revival. The journalist who wrote the piece had been fascinated by the story of the near loss of the house and its transformation. Sometimes, he wrote, our greatest challenges open doors to possibilities we never could have imagined. A knock at the door interrupts my reflection. Come in, I call out, sliding the newspaper back into the drawer. Gabriel appears in the doorway, holding our 6-month-old daughter. Caroline, named to honor my mother, is awake and alert in his arms, her curious eyes soaking in the world around her. Someone was missing her mommy, he says, handing the precious bundle over to my eager arms. As I cradle our daughter, I glance at the photographs on the wall behind my desk. A visual record of the extraordinary journey these past years have been. The opening of the expanded center. Our intimate wedding under the oak tree. And surprisingly, a moment I never could have predicted. Victoria, Olivia, and me standing side by side at the graduation of the first full arts program class, all of us smiling, genuinely. We've got company coming, Gabriel announces, checking the time. Victoria and Olivia should be here in half an hour for Christmas tea. Our relationship with Victoria has evolved into something that still surprises me from time to time. Not exactly a close friendship, but a respectful connection built on the mutual understanding that families come in imperfect and often unexpected forms. After formally retiring as an art history professor in Hartford, Victoria now devotes 2 days a week to the center, sharing her knowledge with students who first feared her, then tolerated her, and finally grew to respect her deeply. They're early, Gabriel notes, glancing out the window at the car. pulling into the snow-covered driveway. I carry little Caroline downstairs, feeling the comforting weight of generations in that moment. My daughter in my arms, in my mother's house, about to share a festive afternoon with people I once considered adversaries. Victoria steps inside, brushing snowflakes from her coat, her hair now completely gray but elegantly styled. She carries a carefully wrapped box that instantly sparks my curiosity. After the greetings, we gathered in the living room where the fire crackled in the fireplace and the scent of cinnamon and apples from the kitchen filled the air. We decorated, modestly for Christmas, with fresh pine branches, soft lights, and carefully chosen ornaments that told stories from different times. Victoria placed the box on the coffee table. "I found this last week when I finally finished organizing the last storage room," she explained. "I thought you should have it, especially now with little Caroline." Curious, I opened the package to reveal a leather-bound photo album. As I flipped it open, it took my breath away. Photos of my birth and early years, many of which I had never seen before. My mother holding me in the hospital, my father looking at the two of us with pure admiration, my first steps in the garden, beneath the oak tree. Harold kept them in a separate trunk that I never allowed myself to go through completely, Victoria admitted, a rare vulnerability in her voice. "I thought it would be important for your daughter to know her full family history." I turned the pages reverently, Gabriel beside me, equally moved by this unexpected window into a past we thought was partially lost. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing the words weren't enough for the gesture. Victoria nodded, a small but genuine smile on her lips. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, from what Harold told me. Your daughter deserves to know her, even if only through images and stories." Olivia stepped closer, holding little Caroline who had been passed into her arms. "I think she has your mother's eyes," she observed gently. I nodded, feeling that transcendent connection through generations, past, present, and future, interwoven in that singular moment. Later, after everyone had left and the house was silent except for the crackling fire and the soft breathing of Caroline asleep in her crib, Gabriel and I sat on the enclosed porch, watching the snow continue to fall. 3 years, I murmured, still in awe of the journey that brought us here. 3 years since that phone call that changed everything. Gabriel took my hand, the metal of his wedding ring catching the fire's golden light. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this? Coming home, creating an arts center, reconciling with Victoria, building our own family?" I shook my head, smiling at the absurdity of the question. "Never. When I walked into this house that day and heard Victoria say I was never part of the family, all I could feel was loss and anger. I never imagined that awful moment would be the catalyst for all of this." I looked out the window, at the snow-covered oak, its powerful silhouette outlined against the night sky. You know what's most surprising? How something that started with such painful words, "You were never family," ended up creating completely new definitions of family for all of us. Gabriel smiled, following my gaze to the oak tree. The strongest roots often grow from the most challenging soil. Touching the small pendant of the blue Victorian house that I rarely took off, I reflected on the full journey, from near devastating loss to this moment of fullness I could have never predicted. When my stepmother sold my childhood home, I say softly, she thought she was taking away my past. She never imagined she was actually forcing me to create a future neither of us could have ever imagined. Gabriel gently squeezes my hand. "And what an extraordinary future you've built." As the old clock in the hallway strikes midnight, marking the end of another day at the blue Victorian house, I feel a deep peace that transcends the simple notion of ownership or belonging. This house, which I had nearly lost forever, had transformed. From a repository of memories into a living generator of new beginnings. Not just for me, but for every young artist who walked through its doors, for Gabriel who had found a new purpose, for Victoria who had finally made peace with the ghosts of the past, and now for our daughter, who would grow up surrounded not only by stories of the past, but by the vibrant promise of the future. The new owner had truly surprised me. Not just Gabriel, who saved the physical property, but fate itself, which had turned a story of loss into one of immeasurable gain. And on that quiet winter night, as the snow continued to fall gently on the roof of the blue Victorian house on Cedar Lane, I finally understood the deepest lesson of this extraordinary journey. Sometimes, it's only when something precious is threatened that we discover its true value and its limitless potential for transformation.